Hi. I am the author known in the conference proceedings as Cory Siler. You can call me Molly. That was a very last-minute name change, so I didn't get into any of the conference paperwork. But I'm from the University of Kentucky Narrative Intelligence Lab, and I'm here with Dr. Stephen Ware presenting our paper, Structure, Agency, and Intent, Preliminary Data Collection. Consider an interactive narrative game played between a human player and an artificial agent we call the Experience Manager. There are many possible stories that could result from the interaction, but potentially much fewer that are any good for either party. The Experience Manager has certain goals, and its job is to ensure the interaction leads to a story that meets those goals. But there are several types of inferences that the Experience Manager must make to figure out how to get there. First of all, which of the possible stories are desirable for the Experience Manager? The answer to that question may depend on the application. For instance, in a game based around a carefully crafted plot, here we have an intelligent narrative community classic, Haunt 2. The Experience Manager will want to make sure that specific plot threads happen, or an intelligent training system like our lab zone traffic stop. The Experience Manager will want to convey specific lessons. But other experience management criteria are more general. For instance, we typically want a story where the character's decisions make sense, and all the events work together to make an interconnected whole. Another inference is, what does the player want? If the Experience Manager ignores the player's goals in pursuit of its own, the player could be frustrated by their lack of meaningful choices in what was supposed to be an interactive experience. The best stories can come about in the overlap between the Experience Managers and the player's goals. But simply knowing which stories are in the overlap is not enough to make one of those stories happen. In an interactive narrative, the Experience Manager and the player typically cannot communicate directly with each other, and their individual attempts to take the story in certain directions may not converge together to make a good story overall. Instead, the Experience Manager must continuously monitor the player's current intentions and provide the player with opportunities that steer those intentions toward the overlap with the Experience Manager's goals. The long-term objective of our research is to facilitate these mutually satisfying stories with the player. We will take inspiration from domains like tabletop role-playing games and improvisational theater, where humans themselves are adept at coordinating with each other to create interactive narrative experiences. The paper we're presenting today focuses on an ongoing construction of a data set of interactions between two humans in a paired interactive narrative browser game. One user is the player, while the other user controls non-player elements as the game master. By studying how players and game masters interact, we hope to understand how to imbue an artificial experience manager with the same flexibility and coordination skills as a human game master. Our data set will consist of several elements. One is an automatically collected log of the gameplay itself, but on top of that, we elicit some additional information from the users. One thing we ask the users for actions taken in the game is, why did you choose this action? Or why do you think your partner chose this action? Another is the user's ratings of certain qualities of their experience throughout the game. We ask them to rate the story's structure, the extent to which it feels like a sensible plot instead of simply a chaotic sequence of events, and their personal agency, their sense that their decisions are having a meaningful impact on the story. What are the advantages of this data? Going back to the questions an experience manager needs to reason about, part of the desiderata for a good story in general is the ability to tie all of those elements together into an interconnected whole. There has been a lot of research on how people perceive story structure for static texts, but the user structure ratings in our dataset will help us analyze how that translates to interactive environments, and thus help establish a baseline for the types of stories an experience manager should target. Moving on to reasoning about what the player wants, we found a need for more real-world test data for goal recognition algorithms. With users' explanations for their choices in the story, we can test whether an algorithm agrees with the user themselves about the purpose served by a given action. Finally, rather than forcing the player into an outcome that the experience manager considers good, we want the experience manager to make the player feel like they themselves have caused that outcome through their own decisions. We will look to the situations where the game master achieves their goals and the player experiences high agency, to understand what factors lead to the player being steered successfully. I will transition here from discussing the project overall to discussing the beginnings of the data collection we've already done this past year. The interactive narrative game we built was played by students in an undergraduate game development class. It was integrated as part of the lesson, so all of the students played the game, but we kept the data only from those who signed a consent form. In the next slides, I will show what this version of the game looked like. This is one user's view of the game. The server matches the user with a partner on another machine and assigns them to a role, the roles being either game master or player. This user has been assigned to be the game master. The game display includes a pane with the characters and their locations and inventories, another pane where the user can update their ratings of structure and agency as they see fit, and a center pane with game narration. When the user is prompted to make decisions, the menu appears here. In the case of the game master, they use it to control the non-player characters. The player's interface is mostly the same, except it shows only information from the player character's surroundings, rather than global information. The game borrows the setting and backstory from Save Grandma, a narrative planning benchmark our lab has used in some previous projects. The player character's grandma is sick, and the player's objective is to bring a potion back home to grandma. By default, the player's ability to act is paused until the game master passes control to them. So, for example, say the game master decides to make the bandit NPC act first. And specifically, the game master will have the bandits travel from their current location at the camp to another location, the crossroads. A new piece of narration appears in the game master view to reflect the action. Then our game master will pass control to the player. Because the player character was at a different location, the player is not informed of the bandits' movements. They leave their cottage, and now they arrive at the crossroads and are made aware of the dagger-wielding bandit there. The player can choose among other options to try and fight the bandit despite apparently being outmatched, and the game master will make the final ruling about whether the attempt succeeds. As the game goes on, a reminder periodically flashes if the user hasn't submitted structure and agency ratings recently. Gameplay continues until the player character saves grandma or dies trying, and users must rate one last time before continuing. After the session, the game interviews each user about decisions made during the story. The person who made a given decision will be asked, "Why did you choose this action?" While the other user will be asked, "Why do you think your partner chose this action?" They can answer however they'd like through a free-form text field. After finishing the interview, the user will see their partner's responses and will be able to start a new session. The next time they play, the server will assign them to a different partner and make them a game master if they were a player before, or make them a player if they were the game master before. We did a post hoc analysis of the data we collected. There were a lot of negative results, and you can see those full details in the paper, but we did find that the user's ratings for structure and for agency were positively correlated with one another. This is encouraging in light of a long-standing discussion in our community about the potential for tension between structure and agency, because a player doing whatever they want can derail the possibility for a well-constructed story. But instead, what we have here is examples of structure and agency harmonizing with each other. As we gather more data, we will target an understanding of how this happens. In particular, we will investigate an idea put forward by an increasing number of researchers that player agency doesn't have to mean allowing everything the player could want, but instead creating implicit suggestions that offer players some things they could want that are most conducive to the narrative. But we discovered some ways that our data collection needs to be refined in the future to let us do everything we want with it. First of all, we wanted to track a user's perception of structure and agency throughout the game, but often a user did not rate voluntarily, and we only got the mandatory ratings from the end of a session. We are planning on collecting ratings next time using a mandatory pop-up with at least a minute between each of its appearances, so it isn't too distracting from gameplay. Second, a reviewer in our previous submission pointed out to us that people are conditioned to think about star ratings in a way that isn't necessarily consistent with what we want to elicit. There are some more rigorous questionnaires for agency out there, such as the one developed by the IRIS project. That's the citation here. But we have yet to find any equivalents for the notion of structure we want to measure. Finally, for the interview where we asked, why did you choose this action? The answers took on lots of different forms. Some users answered in terms of in-character goals, goals about the shape of the narrative, references to stereotypical character roles, and personality traits, seeking novelty, or just amusement, and exploration of game mechanics. We have a taxonomy of these answer types in the paper, and our data set has labels for these different types. But although they're all interesting and valid answers, they do suggest that we might not have asked our question precisely enough. Most of these answers, for instance, could not be easily used to test a goal recognition algorithm. In the next round, we are planning on giving users a fixed set of game objectives to choose from, and having them answer in terms of those game objectives. Eventually, we plan to develop an online platform where anyone can add to the dataset by playing a variety of scenarios with other humans or artificial agents. We will develop and implement our own theories of experience management, and we will invite other researchers to contribute theirs. The URL on the screen is our page for this project. It will host each iteration of our data as we collect it. Right now, it includes our first year data, which includes about 500 total game events across 20 game sessions. And now we will take questions, and we would also love to hear if there are ways we can make our future data collection as useful as possible for your research. Thank you.